issues as well. So Senator DiZoglio, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much to both chairs and to the esteemed members of this committee. Mr. Chairman, I want to first lend my support to Auditor Bum's filed legislation. I know many of us worked on that public records reform bill years ago, and I remember when I was in the House working alongside of the late Representative Peter Kokut on ensuring that our laws were brought up to date around public records. And I know that if the auditor is saying that we need to update language to make that work more effectively, I hope that we'll all join her in passing those proposals to make our government more accountable. Speaking of government accountability, along with transparency, I'm here to respectfully request the passage of Senate Bill 2047, an act prohibiting taxpayer-funded non-disclosure agreements. As many of you know, non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, are legal documents that require confidentiality in an effort to protect intellectual property or trade secrets. As we all also know, however, the Me Too movement shined a light on how these agreements have been abused to hide the misdeeds of powerful serial sexual harassers and abusers by requiring the legal silencing of victims. We have all heard about the Harvey Weinstein, Steve Wynn, and Larry Nassar cases in which hundreds of women were sexually harassed or assaulted. And today we will hear about the Roger Ailes incidents through the testimony of former Fox News reporters Gretchen Carlson and Julie Roginsky. The prevalence of NDAs, however, goes well beyond these more recent and notorious cases. We all remember several years ago when it was exposed that the leadership of the Catholic Church had covered up decades of child sexual molestation, abuse, and rape. One tool that they used to silence child victims and their families and cover up these heinous assaults, allowing priests to move easily from one victim to the next, was the non-disclosure agreement. These same hush agreements are also being used right here in our state government using taxpayer dollars. In the State House alone, we know for a fact that at least 33 non-disclosure agreements have been handed out. I was one of the 33 people who was legally silenced while working in the building over 10 years ago when I was a staffer in my 20s. And I came forward and shared my personal story in the hopes that it would shine a light on how these agreements are being abused across state government to help us as legislators to make informed, meaningful decisions, to reform the use of non-disclosure agreements to prevent their abuse. It is, and excuse me, Mr. Chairman, can I just ask, I can't hear myself actually because somebody's talking in the background. If somebody can mute.
Yes, if there is anybody that is speaking, please silence and go to your microphone, the icon, and make sure there is a line through it, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. As I was saying, we need to get this bill to the governor's desk, and I did share my personal story in the hope that it would help us as legislators to make informed decisions to reform the use of non-disclosure agreements to prevent their abuse. And I am so happy that we were able to pass this bill in the state Senate. I'm grateful for my colleagues' support in making progress in that way. We still need to get this bill to the governor's desk, though. And it's long overdue that we make these policy changes, not only to help those who've already been silenced, but to also protect potential future victims from abusers who could be hiding in plain sight. NDAs perpetuate harassment and outright assault, and they place others at risk by keeping these offenses secret. The agreements allow offenders who often have the power and money at their disposal to purchase the right to abuse others. While other states have been really proactive in reforming outdated laws around non-disclosure agreements, Massachusetts has unfortunately fallen short, and we need to step it up. Effective January 2019, California passed laws restricting the use of NDAs that prevent people from discussing sexual harassment or assault-related information. New Jersey also passed laws completely banning the use of non-disclosure agreements in cases of discrimination, retaliation, and harassment. Both Vermont and Washington ban NDAs as a condition of employment. while Maryland protects employees from retaliation for refusing to sign an NDA. We can and we must do better in Massachusetts, and I know the members of this committee agree with that. So I just want to say I greatly look forward to working with you all on this committee, on this bill, and I respectfully ask for a favorable report. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and I will turn it over to you for Gretchen and Julie to make some comments. Thank you.
Well, I would like to have you introduce them. Senator, please do so at this time. We welcome both Gretchen and Julie, but you can have the honor of introducing them. I know you had reached out to them to have them have the opportunity to address our panel.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for that opportunity. Very grateful. Yes, Gretchen Carlson and Julie Roginsky have been tremendous advocates on reforming laws around sexual harassment, sexual assault to help victims across our entire nation. And they've been doing policy work with legislators from various states to try to specifically, through their organization, Lift Our Voices, which they co-founded, to reform the way that non-disclosure agreements are used. Both had non-disclosure agreements forced upon them as well. And they are here to speak today about why we need to, in Massachusetts, reform the use of those NDAs to make sure that they are not abused and so they're not protecting powerful perpetrators. I believe that they're both here to share their personal stories today, which I think is the most impactful. And I do want to thank the committee for welcoming them, and very grateful to have you on today, Gretchen and Julie. I will turn it over to you. Thanks so much for being here today and taking time out of your very busy schedules.
Yes, we'll go to Gretchen Carlson first. Welcome. You have to unmute. You're at least one of the people that listen to me about muting yourself.
Okay.
Now we can. There you go.
Well, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Chairman Pacheco, Chairman Cabral, members of this committee. I'm grateful to testify today. My name is Gretchen Carlson, and I am one of the co-founders of Lift Our Voices, and it's an organization dedicated to eradicating these silencing mechanisms in the workplace, including non-disclosure agreements. As a side note, I do have federal legislation on the Hill right now in both the House and the Senate to eradicate forced arbitration clauses in employment contracts. That is the second way that we silence people. In 2016, I jumped off the cliff all by myself in suing former Fox News chairman and CEO Roger Ailes for sexual harassment. As part of my settlement, unfortunately, I signed an NDA, never realizing that my case would help to kick off this most recent iteration of the Me Too movement. So in the last 5 years, countless stories have been written about my case. It was actually the subject of a Hollywood movie and a Showtime miniseries. But I have been unable to participate in any of that, even as others have purported to tell my own story. So settlements women receive, we believe, should not be in exchange for our silence. It is scant compensation for losing our jobs, simply for having the courage to demand a more respectful workplace. And here's the startling reality. Of the thousands of women we have spoken to over the past 5 years, most never work in their chosen profession ever again after filing lawsuits for harassment or other workplace toxicity. And a big part of that reason is because they have to sign these NDAs. So imagine applying for a new job, being asked about why you left your previous one, and then trying to explain to your prospective employer, well, I can't really tell you because I'm silenced. So this is why we launched Lift Our Voices, for the hundreds of thousands of Americans who are bound by these silencing mechanisms that prevent them from telling and owning their own personal truths. They are the children bound to perpetual silence despite being sexually abused. They are the women bound to perpetual silence despite being sexually harassed. They are the people of color bound to perpetual silence despite facing racial discrimination. They are the members of the LGBTQ community bound to perpetual silence despite facing discrimination on the basis simply of their sexual orientation. So on behalf of these people, so many of whom live in Massachusetts, and who are today prevented from speaking their own personal truths. I respectfully ask you to support Senate Bill 2047, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you very much for your testimony and your courage and your leadership in speaking out, Gretchen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me turn it over to Julie Roginsky next from Lift Our Voices as well. And then I'll ask the members of the committee if there are any questions from either of our guests after that. But Julie Roginsky, are you with us? If you are, unmute yourself, please.
I am, Chairman. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and now we can see you. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you, Chairman. Well, good morning to you, Chairman Pacheco and Chairman Cabral and members of the Joint Committee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today on this very important topic. My name is Julie Roginsky, and I'm one of the co-founders of Lift Our Voices. I'm also honored to be a part-time resident of Berkshire County. 10 months after Gretchen Carlson filed her groundbreaking lawsuit against Roger Ailes, her bravery gave me the courage to sue Fox News for sexual harassment and retaliation. Like Gretchen, I'm bound by a non-disclosure agreement as part of my settlement that prevents me from telling you whether the movies you've seen or the stories you've read about our cases accurately portray what happened to us. But this morning, I'd like to talk to you about another NDA I signed as a consultant to Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey that will clarify for you the emotional, professional, and personal toll of the silencing mechanisms. As one of the highest ranking and the first person to work on Governor Murphy's campaign, I signed an NDA at the start of my employment that I assumed covered truly proprietary campaign information, such as polling and strategy. In 2017, I told Governor Murphy that I was deeply concerned about inappropriate and potentially unethical behavior by senior members of his campaign team. To my shock, I was fired for blowing the whistle, and from then on consistently reminded by his army of lawyers that I was forever bound by confidentiality provisions that precluded me from discussing anything I had witnessed on the campaign, including the circumstances of my firing. Meanwhile, the governor's office used taxpayer and other resources in a relentless attempt to discredit me and other women who had privately complained about workplace toxicity. Even as the governor was telling the press that no employee of his campaign was bound by an NDA, his lawyers were sending me letters reminding me that I could not come forward precisely because I was bound by an NDA. It took many years and relentless media pressure for Governor Murphy to finally allow me to speak, which is why I'm now able to tell you this story. Partly as a result of this episode, the New Jersey legislature passed a ban on all NDAs that are used to cover up toxic workplace issues. Now, Governor Murphy calls himself a progressive. Fox News calls itself anything but progressive. And yet, both use silencing mechanisms to keep workers from coming forward about workplace toxicity. This issue is nonpartisan because it affects everyone, including perhaps you or people close to you. This issue is also apolitical, and it should not be politicized. Being unable to speak your truth is psychologically brutal and professionally devastating, even as others are able to speak about you. Now, I've spent a great deal of my time in Massachusetts for the last 30 years. I know these are not the values this Commonwealth stands for. I ask you respectfully to support this crucial civil rights legislation, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Julie. And again, thank you for your courage and your leadership on this issue. And now I would like to turn it over to members of the committee. I know the vice chair on the Senate side, Senator Roush, has her hand up. And then Walter Timilty would be next. Senator Roush.
Thank you so much, Chair Pacheco. It's wonderful to be back with you as we get the hearings back up and underway in the legislature. I just wanted to briefly offer my gratitude to all three of you, and particularly to our Ms. Carlson and Ms. Roginsky for your bravery and your leadership, and for setting an example for other women to be able to, for all people who have been victimized and survived, to be able to speak up and speak truthfully and speak loudly. And I think your testimony really highlighted something that often gets lost in this conversation. It's a conversation I've been a part of for a long time in various different ways, but the lack of understanding among and the discrepancy of information and accessibility to information in the parties when they come to the table, specifically with regard to NDAs and what the ramifications of signing those kinds of agreements can mean in the long run as you are continuing to live through. So I just wanted to offer gratitude to both of you in particular, and you know, as a successful champion of transparency in the legislature, particularly, I'm proud to have voted for this before, and look forward to it coming to the floor again. This is not how we should be spending taxpayer dollars to cover up, let's say, indiscretions by leaders in our government, and so I'll be looking forward to casting my yes vote on this bill as it continues to move through the process. So thank you again to both of you, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to offer a few words.
Thank you very much, Senator, and thank you for your leadership, long-time leadership on this and other issues. Thank you. Senator Timilty.
Thank you, Chair Pacheco. And first of all, to Ms. Roginsky and Ms. Carlson, thank you very much for the courage that you exhibit on a daily basis for all of us. Thank you very much. I, too, voted for Senator DiZoglio's initiative in the state Senate. We're very proud that that passed unanimously. And with that, I just have a very simple question in terms of a prism from across the country. Aside from NDAs, what protections have been established around the country and other states to prevent, obviously, harassment and workplace toxicity that you have witnessed, please?
Well, Chairman, Gretchen, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, so the two silencing mechanisms are forced arbitration clauses in employment contracts and NDAs. So we're laser focused on trying to eradicate both. Because the Arbitration Act is a federal act that came about in 1925, we are really tackling this on the federal level. There have been state laws that have passed eradicating forced arbitration in employment contracts, but when the test cases have come before the judges, what has happened is that they have deferred back to the federal law, unfortunately. So that is why my efforts for the last 4 years on Capitol Hill have been so important. And I'm just really proud to say that we reintroduced the bill in July in the House and the Senate bicamerally. Again, it's bipartisan. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's my sponsors are Lindsey Graham and Kirsten Gillibrand in the Senate. It's probably the only thing they agree on. And then I have a Republican and a Democrat in the House. I need 10 Republicans in the Senate to pass this at the federal level. It will probably pass the House, and that will be that it goes into law. So that is a huge, huge step for millions of workers across the nation. And then I'll let Julie speak about the NDA movements that we're doing throughout the states, because it's a little bit different. You can affect much more change at the state level.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I will say to you that Senator DiZoglio referenced California. 2 weeks ago, California passed not just one of the strongest NDA bans in the nation, along with New Jersey's, but also they also ban non-disparagement agreements, which are also very helpful in covering up toxicity, because if you ban NDAs, but you also have an agreement that says, well, you can't disparage somebody, that's another way of basically silencing workers. So I would say to you that the state of California and the state of New Jersey have led on this issue. New Mexico has led on this issue as well with NDAs, banning them for sexual harassment and assault. Senator DiZoglio already referenced other states, but I would say to you that somebody, as I said, who went to college and graduate school in Boston, who's lived on and off in Berkshire County for many, many years, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to me, has been so wonderful in paving the way for civil rights for so long that it just stands to reason that this is something that the Commonwealth would also seek to ban. All women want to do is work with dignity, not just women, men, people of color, members of the LGBTQ community. By silencing people and preventing them from coming forward and speaking their truths, you're effectively driving generations of people out of the workforce. You're preventing them not just from staying in their current jobs, but preventing them potentially from coming forward and explaining to prospective employers why they left, which means that they really can't get hired if they can't describe the real circumstances of why they left their previous job. You're driving people out of their careers as a result of that. And I know that these are not the values that this Commonwealth stands for, because I've spent so much time in the Commonwealth. I know it's not what my neighbors in Berkshire County stand for, and I truly hope that you understand that what Senator DiZoglio and the other sponsors are asking you to do is minimal compared to what states like California and New Jersey have done. They're simply saying that you can't use that taxpayers should have the right to know if their money is being used to cover up workplace toxicity, which is a minimal request. And so we hope that you agree that at minimum taxpayers deserve to know what their money is being spent on as an issue of transparency and taxpayer fairness.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Roginsky and Ms. Carlson, for your testimony, and again, your courage and leadership. And Senator DiZoglio, thank you very much for reaching out and making sure that we had an opportunity to hear directly from these two amazing individuals. And if there's any questions of members of the committee, any final questions of members of the committee on this subject?